Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of Little Acts of Kindness. This will be part 25, chapter 25, entitled Aftermath of the Tournament. Watching the sports festival was a bit of a tradition for him these years. While it was just a bunch of kids fighting each other in order to be recognized as potential heroes, it was still entertaining. It also gave him a clue as to what potential quirks he might see in the future. This year, there were quite a few interesting students in the first year, especially in the class that had been attacked already. Students of 1A. Of course, one of the most notable was that Todoroki boy, who didn't use fire. Was it possible for the son of the flame hero to not have fire? If so, why ice? It wasn't particularly something that made sense unless the mother had an ice quirk. Another notable student was Bakugo, who had a powerful explosion quirk and what seemed to be a temper to match. With an angry scowl, the boy looked more like he was failing to pretend to be a hero. Both were students he would have to keep an eye on. They were powerhouses that could prove to be useful, or they could prove to be trouble. Looking at the screen again, his eyes were drawn to one particular student, and he was reminded of his daughter. The kid looked a bit like her, from the color of his hair to the way he kept away from the spotlight, never coming in first. He hummed. He hadn't spoken with his daughter in about 20 years by this point. Perhaps he should pay her a visit. Though he doubted she would want to see him, they hadn't left on the best of terms after all. He let her leave. It was her life to do as she chooses, no matter how much he would have preferred her to keep to the family business, as it were. Perhaps she had forgiven him by this point. He doubted it, but still he decided to check in on her in the near future. 20 years was a fairly long time, after all. Turning his attention back to the sports festival, he saw it was the finals. These were the students to keep an eye on. From the Yayorozu heiress with her powerful creation quirk to Shinso with his brainwashing quirk. This year's students seemed to have a lot of potential. Then he saw the battle of Midoriya versus Monoma. The blonde had a copy quirk and Midoriya had an erasure quirk, one that looked to be similar to that underground hero, possibly his son. At least, those were his thoughts until the boy's body lit up with a green lightning and he smashed through the invisible barrier. A strength enhancement quirk, one completely different than the erasure quirk, one that he very much doubted was the result of a quirk marriage. No, he had a feeling it was something else. He gave a hum. It would be interesting to know what exactly sort of quirk the boy had to have two different-looking quirks. Perhaps he should take a look at the quirk registry to find out. Izuku smiled as he cooked breakfast. Yesterday, when he had returned home, he had been much too tired to say anything. He had eaten some leftovers and passed out onto his bed. After another 10 minutes, he finished and went to get his mother from her room. He found her up and dressed. "Good morning," he greeted with a smile. "Good morning," she replied, not quite looking at him. "Breakfast is ready." "Okay," she said, following him into the dining room. As they sat down, he smiled. "So, Mom, did you watch the sports festival yesterday?" She nodded, not saying anything as she mechanically ate. "What did you think of my quirk?" "You don't have a quirk," she automatically responded. "Yes, I do, Mom," he told her softly. "No, you don't. You're quirkless," she said, her normal, lifeless voice becoming agitated. Surprising Izuku, as this was the first real emotion he had seen from her since the accident when he was 9. "How many times do I have to repeat this?" Izuku questioned aloud. His mom normally had trouble accepting new information, but this was on a different level. "Mom, I have a quirk. I don't have the double pinky joint. I was never quirkless. The doctor lied to us." "No. No, no, no. You don't have a quirk. Never have a quirk. You're quirkless. Quirkless, understand?" She spoke, her voice sounding almost panicked, green eyes darting back and forth. "Quirkless, Izuku." Izuku frowned, alarmed at his mom's strange behavior. "Promise me. Quirkless," she said, almost frantically. Not liking to see his mom so upset, he bit his lip and agreed in a confused tone. "All right. I'm quirkless, then." "Good. Good, such a good boy," she murmured, her eyes losing the focus and intensity they had gained. Izuku found himself staring at his food in silence, confused over his mom's reaction, how she refused to believe he had a quirk. This wasn't normal behavior, but did that mean she was getting better? Or was the fact he had a quirk something too different for her to believe? His stomach twisted, and Izuku pushed away the reminder of his food, unable to eat. Why was she so set on insisting that he was quirkless? Shoda stared down at Miss Joke and Rocklock. "How did you let him out of your sight?" he asked, his voice low, but the two other underground heroes heard him perfectly. I was keeping an eye on him. It's just... I lost sight of him in the crowds for a moment. Next thing I know, you're texting me that he's been caught and that we would have a chat. Miss Joke answered quickly, giving a nervous chuckle. Shoda leaned over the desk, black eyes piercing into the small hero's dark green eyes. Do you know what happened in that moment you lost sight of him? Miss Joke gulped. I saw the article. So you saw that he nearly managed to rape one of the kids of UA. Did you know that he planned to rape and kill my student? Miss Joke shook her head, looking nervous. Shoda sat down in the chair across from them, steepling his fingers. Would you like to take a guess as to why he planned such a blatant attack? Rocklock met his gaze. Why? Shoda grinned at them, full of teeth and mocking. Because he knew he was being tailed. He learned that he was being followed and watched. You two wouldn't happen to know anything about how he knew that you were tailing him, would you? Miss Joke shook her head instantly. No, I don't know how he knew we were following him. Rocklock nodded, agreeing with Miss Joke. Shoda looked between the two of them. He knew they were good heroes. They weren't rookies who make mistakes, so somehow Nashi Doi had managed to notice the two of them. And thanks to Nezu and the investigation the principal had led, Shoda knew how they messed up. Did that mean he was going to let them off the hook that easily? No. The fact was one of his students had been hurt, again. Midoriya had been tormented by this man, and Shoda was going to make sure that the man faced life in prison. But if it had been up to him, Shoda would have voted for capital punishment. But capital punishment had been outlawed 100 or so years ago. Such a shame. Shoda hummed non-committally to Miss Joke, who had started rambling on about all the precautions they had taken. He raised an eyebrow, cutting off her rambles. Are you quite done? Obviously you missed something. You said you used scent blockers, but what about covering your body heat? The two underground heroes exchanged looks before shaking their heads. No, we didn't. His quirk registry didn't mention anything about body heat, Rocklock said. Of course, because the files always say everything about a quirk, Shoda responded dryly. He took the file and opened it. Quirk. Snake adaptations. Gives him full bodily features resembling a snake. Shoda paused for a moment. With a little research, it was easy to find that snakes can use their tongues to scent the air around them. They also have poor eyesight, though the medical file for Nashi reveals that his eyesight was only a little below 20/20. But the main thing here was that some snake species have pits which let them take in nearby body heat. But he didn't have those pits. Didn't he? Shoda threw back, sliding a picture taken yesterday. Turns out he did. He was hiding them. And when questioned, eventually answered that it lets him sense body heat up to 5 meters. So, my question to you two. Why were you within 15 feet of him enough for him to figure out he was being tailed? He couldn't blame them for not knowing to cover their body heat. He may have even made the same mistake had he tailed him. What he could rake them over the coals for was being so close that Nashi could pick up their body heat. Shoda listened as they gave him a full briefing on the happenings, how they had followed him, how he had met with some other people, and they had gotten closer to listen in on the conversations. That they would be following up on these people because they believed that they were connected with the Shiha Saikai, that at least one of the people had formerly worked for the Yakuza group until his arrest. There was one piece of information that I overheard the day before the sports festival that had me especially worried, Rocklock said, looking a bit sick. What? He was talking to a group of guys. He told him that this year's students weren't as good as last year's and that he missed the quirkless runt and playing with them. He mentioned that he should have taken the boy when he had the opportunity instead of letting the game continue. Rocklock grimaced at this, his face one of revulsion. One of the other guys said he knew the feeling, how there was a little girl with pure white hair that his boss wouldn't let any of them touch. Shoda grimaced, and Miss Joke looked like she wanted to throw up. The fact that people got off on children was the worst. Out of all the villains, criminals, and scum that heroes had to deal with, rapists and pedophiles were some of the worst. Anyways, we told the police what we knew, and now I'm officially joining Night Eye on his case for the Shiha Saikai, Rocklock said. I will be returning to my students as lack of sleep really isn't good for me. I don't know how you do it, Shoda, but I gave my number to Night Eye in case he needs an extra person when he tracks down these criminals. Shoda nodded. At least his fellow heroes had valid reasons for Nashi knowing they were tailing him. No matter how much he hated that it put Midoriya in harm's way, they had been doing their job, and gathering information was part of their job. Thank you for your time, he said, nodding as he stood up, gathering the files and turning to leave. I don't suppose I could get you to agree to a date, Miss Joke called out to him as he walked away. Not in a million years, Shoda tossed back, rolling his eyes as he made his way to the car, Miss Stokes' laughter echoing behind him. I'll get you one day, he heard faintly as he exited the main door. Shoda shook his head, wondering why some people never seemed to take a hint. A blatantly obvious hint. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 25 of Little Acts of Kindness. Chapter 26 will be up next. Hope you all are still enjoying this fic, and as always, thank you so much for listening.